Anne Frank by Alexandra Zapruder. Who was Anne Frank? Can you imagine being punished just for being who you are? Or because you look, think, or feel differently from those around you? This is what happened to many people in Europe in the 1930s and 40s. It started when a group called Nazis, not C's, took over the country of Germany under the leadership of a man named Adolf Hitler. The Nazis changed laws to control people's lives. They hated many people, but they treated Jews worst of all. The Nazis told Jews where they could go and what they could do. Many Jews no longer felt safe even in their own homes. Words to know: Nazis. A group of people who followed the ideas of a German leader named Adolf Hitler. Jews. Those born into a Jewish family or who practiced the religion of Judaism. Anne Frank was born into a German Jewish family. Her family moved from Germany to Holland to escape the Nazis. But when she was 11 years old, the Nazis attacked Holland. She and her family hid from them for almost 2 years. During that time, she kept a diary. She wrote almost every day about her life, thoughts, and feelings. A huge crowd of Nazi soldiers gathers to hear Adolf Hitler speak in Germany in 1936. Years later, Anne Frank's diary was published and read by millions. Even though she was a teenager, her diary helped many people, even grown-ups, understand how she and others felt during this time. In her own words, "I hope I will be able to confide everything to you, as I have never been able to confide in anyone, and I hope you will be a great source of comfort and support." Anne Frank's diary has been published in 70 languages around the world. Childhood in Germany. Anne Frank was born in Germany in 1929. She lived with her parents, Edith and Otto Frank, and her older sister, Margot. Anne's relatives had lived in Germany for a long time. For her family, being Jewish was important, and so was being German. When Anne was 3, Adolf Hitler took power in Germany. He was a dictator who blamed the Jews for Germany's problems. He gave speeches to huge crowds. His followers, the Nazis, made sure his ideas were always on the radio and in the newspapers. Over time, Hitler convinced many people that he was right. Others went along because they were scared of what would happen to them if they disagreed. Words to know: Dictator. A leader who makes all the rules for a country and controls its people. The Nazis were anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic. That means they hated Jews. They also punished people who did not want Adolf Hitler to be their leader. They made life terrible for anyone who didn't fit into their idea of what a German citizen should be like. Many people, especially Jews, suddenly became outsiders in their own country. The Nazis used an ancient figure called a swastika, as their symbol. They put it everywhere, on flags, uniforms, posters, and buildings. For thousands of years before, the swastika was a symbol for good. But the Nazis used it to frighten people and show them that they were in charge of Germany. Anne's parents no longer felt safe in Germany. They wanted to get their family away from the Nazis. They moved to the nearby country of Holland, hoping to find safety there. Nazi soldiers make arrests. In her time, Anne Frank was a young girl in the 1930s in Germany. Many things were very different in her world from how they are today. Staying in touch. Few people used telephones. Instead, they wrote letters and mailed them. If they needed to reach someone right away, they could send a telegram, a written message delivered quickly. Fun. For fun, kids read books, played outside, and went to the movies with friends. There were no computers or video games. World events. It was a hard time in America and Europe. Millions of people lost their jobs and suddenly became very poor. Many people couldn't even afford to buy bread. This time period is called the Great Depression. Depression. Food. In Germany, strudel, was a favorite dessert. It is a pastry filled with fruit. People still eat it today. News. People got most of their news by listening to the radio or reading newspapers. Most people had never seen a TV. Life in Holland. Anne's family found a home in the city of Amsterdam. Amsterdam. Anne and Margot learned to speak Dutch, the language of Holland, and went to school. Anne had many friends. Some were Jewish and others were not. She went to birthday parties and the movies, and she played ping pong. Anne Frank and her family lived in a house like this in Amsterdam. On her 13th birthday, she began writing her diary. Anne was curious and loved to talk. Once, when her teacher scolded her for talking, she got out of trouble by writing funny stories about a chatterbox. In her own words, I get along with all my teachers. Mr. Keesing, the old fogey who teaches math, was mad at me for the longest time because I talked so much. World War II. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis wanted to rule all of Europe. They began taking over nearby countries. Then, on September 1st, 1939, the German army attacked Poland. Great Britain and France declared war on Germany to defend Poland and try to stop Hitler. World War II had begun. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Ocean, there were other battles brewing. Japan wanted to rule all of East Asia. Countries far away from the Germans were falling under Japanese control. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese bombed the United States naval base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan and soon after joined Great Britain in fighting Nazi Germany and the other Axis countries. The two sides. Germany invaded many countries in Europe during the war. They and the countries that fought on their side were called the Axis powers. The Americans, British, and Russians worked together to defeat them. They were called the Allies. The two sides fought a bitter war for 6 years and millions died. Words to know. Invade. To enter and try to take over a place, often by force. Separating Jews. The Nazis did everything they could to segregate Jews. They forced them to wear a yellow star with the word Jew on their clothing so that everyone would know who was Jewish. Words to know. Segregate. To separate someone or something from others. In May 1940, the Germans invaded Holland. Right away, the Nazis passed laws to take away the rights of Jews and other people. Jews were no longer allowed to own bicycles, go to the movies, or walk in public parks. They could not even visit non-Jewish friends. The Nazis had all of the power. They could do whatever they wanted. Jews lived in constant fear of being arrested, beaten, or killed. Then the Nazis made plans to send the Jews away from Holland. No one knew where they would be going. In her own words, "Our freedom was severely restricted by a series of anti-Jewish decrees. You couldn't do this and you couldn't do that, but life went on." Into hiding. In her own words, Margot and I started packing our most important belongings into a school bag. The first thing I stuck in was this diary, then curlers, handkerchiefs, school books, a comb, and some old letters. I stuck the craziest things in the bag. The building where the Franks hid in Amsterdam is now a museum called the Anne Frank House. On July 5th, 1942, Margot got a call-up notice. This meant the Nazis planned to take her away. The family refused to be separated. They went into hiding instead. Anne's parents had been preparing their hiding place for many months. They called it the Secret Annex, Annex. It was attached to a warehouse, and the entrance was behind a cupboard. 4 workers from Mr. Frank's business helped the family. Anne had to pack and leave in a hurry. She did not know what it would be like in hiding, or if she would ever have a normal life again. Inside the secret annex. The Frank family was first to arrive in the hiding place. A week later, they were joined by a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Van Pels and their son, Peter. At first, Anne and Margot shared a room. Anne decorated the walls with photos of movie stars. In her own words, "Up to now, our bedroom was very bare. Thanks to Father, who brought my entire postcard and movie star collection here, I was able to plaster the walls with pictures. It looks much more cheerful." Anne's bedroom in the secret annex is pictured here in the Anne Frank house. Heroes who helped. Miep, Bep, and the other helpers often brought food, clothing, and supplies. It was very dangerous to aid Jews in hiding. If the Nazis found out, those who helped the Franks would be punished. Daily life was hard. Anne was only rarely allowed to open a window, and she could never, ever go outside. After a few months, a man named Fritz Pfeffer, came to hide in the secret annex too. Margot moved into their parents' room, and Anne had to share her room with him. Instead of a bed, she slept on 2 chairs pushed together. In her own words, "Not being able to go outside upsets me more than I can say, and I'm terrified our hiding place will be discovered." 8 people lived in a cramped place with a constant fear of being caught. If the Nazis found them, they would be arrested and probably killed. A few times, they almost got caught. These were terrifying moments. They had to share everything, even one small bathroom. Sometimes they complained and argued with each other. In her own words, "Footsteps in the house, the private office, the kitchen, then, on the staircase. All sounds of breathing stopped, 8 hearts pounded. Then we heard a can fall and the footsteps receded. We were out of danger so far." There were many rules to keep the hiding place safe. They had to stay away from windows so no one would see them. They had to be quiet all day. They couldn't even flush the toilet until the warehouse workers left at night. They always had to be careful. Pictured in the Anne Frank house, this room was shared as a living room and dining room. but was also the bedroom of the Van Pels family. Anne's diary. Anne's diary was like a best friend during these scary times. She even gave her diary the name Kitty. It wasn't easy growing up in hiding. Even though she was surrounded by people, Anne felt alone. Her friends were gone. She couldn't play like other kids. Sometimes she argued with her parents and sister. Other times, she felt like everyone was bossing her around. When Anne got fed up, she told her diary how she felt. Anne dreamed of being a writer when she grew up. Sometimes she felt discouraged, but she didn't give up. She kept working toward her goal of being a real writer. Anne described what it was like to hide from the Nazis. She paid attention and wrote down the details in her diary. One day, Anne heard on the radio that people were planning to collect diaries after the war. She thought people might want to read her diary too. So she worked even harder on her writing than before. In her own words, "I really believe, Kit, that I'm a little nutty today, and I don't know why. My writing's all mixed up. I'm jumping from one thing to another, and sometimes I seriously doubt whether anyone will ever be interested in this drivel." Capture. On August 4th, 1944, the worst fears of the Frank family came true. At about 10:30 a.m., a group of Nazis burst into the hiding place. They arrested everyone, including 2 of the helpers. The Nazis sent the hiders to Westerbork, a concentration camp in Holland. 1 month later, they were sent on a terrible 3-day train ride to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Auschwitz, Birk in Au, a camp in Poland. Words to know. Concentration camp, a place where Nazis held Jews and others. Many people were killed or died there. Auschwitz-Birkenau. One well-known concentration camp was Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland. Anne Frank, her sister, and mother were among millions of people sent there. When a train arrived, those who were young, old, or looked too sick to work were taken away and killed. The others entered the camp, where guards took their clothes and all their possessions. They shaved the prisoners' heads and gave each one a striped uniform. Prisoners worked all day at hard labor. At night, they were crowded into hard bunks with a single blanket for several people. There was almost no food, and people died of terrible hunger and sickness. Jews from Hungary arrive at Auschwitz-Birkenau in June 1944. Arriving in the camp was terrifying. It was dark, and guards carrying whips yelled orders at people. They separated the men and women. Anne, her mother, and sister ended up together, but they never saw their father, the Van Pels, or Fritz Pfeffer again. Later, Anne and Margot were sent together without their mother to the Bergen-Belsen camp. They both got sick and died of a disease called typhus in March 1945, about 2 months before the end of the war. Of the 8 people who had been in hiding, only Anne's father, Otto Frank, survived. Barbed wire and high fences kept prisoners from escaping from the concentration camps. End of the war. The Allied American, British, and Russian armies defeated the Germans in World War II. Adolf Hitler died on April 30th, 1945, and the war in Europe ended on May 8th. The Allied soldiers also entered the concentration camps and liberated the prisoners. The Nazi period of terror was over, but Europe would be torn apart for many years to come. Survivors of a concentration camp at Ebensee, Austria. U.S. soldiers liberated the camp on May 7, 1945. It took a long time for people to recover from what had happened to them. Many of them had lost everything: their homes, their jobs, their families, and friends. It was difficult to start over with almost nothing, but people slowly rebuilt their lives. Words to know: liberate, to set free; defeat, to win a war, battle, or contest against a person, group, or country. Finding Anne's diary. June 12, 1929. Anne Frank born in Frankfurt, Germany. January 1933. Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. By February 1934, all of the Frank family has moved to Holland. May 1940. Germans invade Holland. July 6, 1942. Franks go into hiding. August 4, 1944. People in secret annex arrested, sent to Auschwitz 1 month later. Miep, who had helped the Franks, found Anne's diary in the hiding place. She gathered her notebooks, papers, and the diary and put them in a safe place. She hoped that Anne would come back at the end of the war to get them. Anne never came back, but her father, Otto, did. He found out after the war that his wife and 2 daughters had died. He was terribly sad and alone. Then Miep gave him Anne's diary and papers. He read them and decided to make Anne's dream of being a published writer come true. Anne's diary was published in 1947. Since then, millions have read it. Her diary inspired a play and a movie. There have been schools and streets named after her. There is even a museum in the building where she hid. Through her diary, Anne Frank told people what it was like to live in hiding. She shared things that we would not know if she hadn't written them down. She was young, but she helped many people, including grown-ups, understand an important part of our history. October 1944. Anne and Margot sent to Bergen-Belsen. Edith Frank forced to stay at Auschwitz. January 6, 1945. Edith Frank dies at Auschwitz. January 27, 1945. Auschwitz liberated by Russian army. Otto Frank is freed. March 1945. Anne and Margot die at Bergen-Belsen. June 3, 1945. Otto Frank returns to Amsterdam. Summer 1947. Anne's diary first published in Amsterdam. Children visit a reconstruction of Anne in the secret annex at a wax museum in Berlin. 6 other young writers. Anne Frank wasn't the only teenager to keep a diary. Many others did too. Some hid like she did. Some left their homes to find safety. Others lived in ghettos. Each diary helps us understand more about life during this terrible time. 1. 15-year-old Otto Wolff hid in a forest with his sister and parents. He wrote almost every day for 3 years. He was killed shortly before the end of the war. His sister and parents survived. Words to know: Ghetto. A closed-off area, usually in a Polish town or city, where the Nazis forced Jews to live together. 2. Peter Feigl started his diary in hiding in France at age 13. He hid for nearly 2 years, helped by Catholic, Quaker, and Protestant rescuers. He escaped to Switzerland and settled in America after the war. 3. Yitzhak Rudashevsky, age 15, kept his diary in a ghetto in Lithuania. He wrote about studying and learning with other young people in the ghetto. He and his family did not survive. 4. Miriam Korber was born in Romania. She wrote her diary at age 18 in a ghetto in Ukraine. She became a doctor after the war. 5 and 6. Peter Gintz and Eva Ginzova were brother and sister. They both wrote diaries in a ghetto called Terezin. Peter made many works of art there, too. He was killed in a concentration camp at age 15. Eva survived and became an artist. A Changed World. Anne Frank was one of millions of people killed during the Nazi genocide. Gen-a-cide. We call this event in history the Holocaust. Holocaust. After the war, world leaders decided to learn from the past. They punished as many of the killers as they could. They worked to understand how the Holocaust happened, and they made laws to try to stop it from happening again. Our world is not perfect, but we do not stop trying. We study the past to learn from our mistakes. We remember those who were killed in the Holocaust, and we work to make the world better and safer for all of us.